It is so wonderful to see so many community members here this evening. Our wonderful faculty, soon you'll hear from Rebecca Doggin. But Eric, first of all, I would like to be the first to welcome, not first, but welcome you to this event this evening. We're so excited. Your book really inspired me, especially when you got to the resurrection part. You know, April was Poetry Month, and one of my favorite poems, just to get you started, of Walt Whitman, what is it that you express in your eyes? It seems to be more than all the print I have read in my life. I know you're going to take us through your eyes tonight to help us make a difference in our community. So we're really looking forward to this. So I'd like to give you Dr. Rebecca Spiritu Doggin.
Thank you, Dean Pellegrino. I really appreciate your kind words. I want to welcome you all, myself, to the University of Scranton. Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful day and coming inside when the sun is actually shining. So I appreciate the effort. In addition to the sponsorship by the Panuska College of Professional Studies, we were also received a grant for this event tonight from the University of Scranton Office of Equity and Diversity. And in addition to that, the Scranton area chapter of the National Alliance for Mental Illness is also here and a sponsor for this event too. A lot of their executive board and board members are here, and they have some wonderful information there on the back table, so feel free to access that on your way in or way out of the event. This is the first annual behavioral speaker series event that we'll be holding. We're hoping there'll be many more. This is the inaugural event. And we are very honored to have Eric Arauz here for our first speaker. But this event was developed by a committee of folks who are dedicated both personally and professionally to improving mental health care in our community here in the greater Scranton area. I'd like to acknowledge the members of our planning committee, most of whom are here tonight. Some are not due to flu and childcare issues. But if you are here tonight, please stand so that we can acknowledge your support for this event. First, I want to acknowledge Owen Doherty, who's it was his inspiration to get this whole event started and to bring this committee together. So I want to make sure we acknowledge and thank him for this great idea. And Charlene Doherty and Marie Onakovich from NAMI, Marion Farrell, Professor of Nursing here in our Department of Nursing. Jeremy Yale is the administrator of the Lackawanna and Susquehanna Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities Program. Jim Gallagher from the Northeast Behavioral Health Care Consortium. Renee Courtney, Clinical Director of the Psych Services Center. Bo Hoban from Lackawanna County Drug and Alcohol Program, and Kevin Brown from Scranton Counseling Center. So you can see there's been a big collaboration trying to figure out what, thank you all, what we can do in our area to increase quality services for people that experience mental health issues. So please thank them. And I'd like to take the next couple minutes just to introduce our speaker. So Eric Arauz is the president of the Trauma Institute of New Jersey and an adjunct faculty member at the Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical in the Department of Psychiatry. He is an international keynote speaker and trainer and national award-winning author. His book is on the back table, and he has very generously donated those books to us here tonight. So there is enough books for everyone in the room to take a book home. They are on the back table, and after the event, he has also generously offered to sign them. So if you'd like to take a few minutes to say hello and get your book signed, you're welcome to do that, and you're also welcome to take one if you haven't already gotten one from the back table. Eric is the creator and lead trainer of the first statewide trauma training initiative with the New Jersey Department of Children and Families for over 6,000 workers called Taming Trauma. He is a former state officer in addiction for the state of New Jersey and was the co-creator and vice chairman of the State Opiate Task Force. Eric has won numerous national advocacy awards, including the 2009 Voice Award from SAMHSA and the U.S. Department of Human Services, the 2012 Champion of Psychiatric Nursing from the American Psychiatric Nurses Association, and the 2015 Gloria Huntley Award for reducing the use of seclusion and restraint in the national clinical practice from NAMI. Eric has accomplished all of this since being diagnosed with bipolar I disorder with psychotic features, addiction, complex trauma from extensive child abuse, and post-traumatic stress disorder from being held in 4-point restraint for over 24 hours while hospitalized in a maximum security Veterans Administration psychiatric hospital. Eric is a veteran of the United States Navy that served on a strike destroyer as a satellite communications technician in the Red Sea during Operation Desert Storm. I'd like us to give us a nice, warm Scranton welcome to Eric Arauz.
So you're going to bring the slides up?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone in the back hear me? I'd like to thank everybody in Scranton that worked together to bring me out here. My name is Eric Arauz. The reason that I titled this presentation, A Futureless Man, it's especially being on a college campus. When the existentialist philosopher Sartre was asked to review William Faulkner's book, The Sound and the Fury, he read through it and he came back, he said, William Faulkner is a futureless man. And when I use the word humiliation and a humiliated life, I think about the ideas that we're going to talk about tonight with stigma and self-stigma, and the idea that humiliation is when you are taken out of the systems of your known life. It's when you are made to feel that you are not part of the community, and at worst, that you are not part of society. And the stigma does not just hold for the person who's considered the patient. With mental illness being what it is oftentimes a family diagnosis. And as you work in it and you see all the different facets of it, you'll find all the people affected by it. Tonight's journey, let's see, make sure this is on. Tonight's journey as we go through this is going to be a mutual communion of walking through stigma and self-stigma, in the sense that to be here at Scranton, which is a Jesuit institution, my biological father went to Fordham University, which is also a Jesuit university, and my biological father died homeless due to active mental illness. He had an MBA from Fordham after serving in the military, and eventually died in Paterson, New Jersey. So when I saw this painting, which is called Guernica by Picasso, it really resonated with me because it's actually about the trauma of the bombings of the innocent civilians in the Basque lands of northern Spain. And my last name being Arauz is Basque. And I think about how it started to really emulate and mimic and become truly a working metaphor for what happened in our family, because the painting is done in a motif called cubism, which, much like traumatic recall, when you work with people, you'll find that there's bits and pieces that they get back of their story. Under stress, you start to lose parts of the brain that allow you to have language in your story, and you embed it in your system. And when you start looking at that painting, it's a hard painting to sit there and give an exact analogy and analysis of what you think it is, outside of going from part and parcel, going in and out of it, going from the right brain field to the left brain conceptualizations. And that's still what we're going to see tonight as I go with you in my story and we walk through, as we piece it together. As we start to understand what is the physiology, what is the feel of an active mental illness, what does it mean to get up and tell a narrative that's going to be emotional and at the same time be able to integrate what you're saying? And how can you put together, not just when you see up there when I talk about the chaos narrative, which is for medical sociology, why it's important when you're bringing storytellers in, especially storytellers around stigma and serious mental illness, the unknowable disorders, the ones that the professionals oftentimes create the largest barriers to, because it's very hard to put yourself in that first person experience of it. So we become clinical models instead of people. So, and we're looking for a story to try to integrate our experience, whether we're family members, whether we're students, whether we're board members, about how we can start sitting here and relate to our own story, oftentimes through another person's narrative, to gain insights inward. And that's what that chaos narrative is. And if I do my job, by the end of the night, we will have more insight into what the experience was for me. To journey first with a parent with serious mental illness, to form that stigma against him and what happened, and then to have that illness and end up in numerous psychiatric hospitals, to be considered beyond treatment, to suffer in psychosis, to experience the misery of mania. And then how would one piece together a life from there when there aren't many maps to find you? With the term humiliated, there's with the idea of self-stigma. And self-stigma is both for the person who has the serious mental illness as well as for the family. I work a lot with families. I watched in my own family the way that a family starts to become smaller. The way that my mother didn't want to talk to people anymore. The family can't figure out its own narrative anymore. I didn't understand it. I couldn't figure out an identity that I would have any pride in. This is from the work of a suicidologist out of Rutgers University named Harmut Markros. And if anybody works in the field of suicidology, it really goes part and parcel with Thomas Joyner's model of the interpersonal model of suicide, where he talks about thwarted belongingness, where you lose any connection to the world. You have no one to love you. And even worse, you have no one to love. And as a person who's been a patient in maximum security hospitals and to this day goes around the country into state psychiatric hospitals to do trauma trainings, if you didn't look at people through the prism of the DSM-5, all you would see is suffering. All you would see is disconnection. The hospitals are awash in sorrow. I got to talk to a man who's been in a wheelchair for 20 years when I was in Colorado. His psychosis so devastatingly high that all he sees is dead babies on the ground. They said he hadn't spoken to someone in 10 years. And to attune to that misery and to find a connection in that physiology takes time. And it takes empathy. And if you want the key for empathy, it's mercy. Mercy is what will allow you to connect to people that are suffering. Mercy will help you not objectify somebody in front of you and just say they have a disease and they're sick. And mercy takes fortitude. And it takes strength to keep opening up to. And when you're put on to that spectrum, as I was put on that spectrum with the diagnosis, it took a self-mercy after years to believe that I could have a life and find something to be proud of again. So as we're going to start moving into my own personal narrative, what we're really going to watch tonight is I'm going to walk you in and out of a story, and you're going to see me experience emotions. And there'll be authentic of emotions as I re-experience the memories of what I've had done to me, what has been part of my family's life, and then lastly, the redemptive parts, the parts of the salvation. And conceptually, when you see that on the screen with the idea of thinking of a brain vertically, when you're at ease, you have access to things, and when you're in danger, you become more primal. You become afraid. You become fearful. And when someone has enough tools and has a way to stay safe in their story, they can integrate it as we become a team, back and forth. I will know when you're experiencing visceral discomfort. I will actively generate it. But it will keep us in a window of tolerance where we're safe. And where we come out on the other side with the idea, especially at a school like Scranton, especially at a university that unabashedly talks about redemption, we will see what's on the other side of oblivion and a journey to hell. That's what you'll see conceptually as someone goes up and down. And the left side parts of the brain, and this will be the last real learning part, is you have on the left side of your brain, you have the Broca's area where you develop language. You have the Wernicke's in the back where you actually process it. Under stress, that evolutionary adaptation of the cortex goes away. That's why it's so hard to have tough discussions with families, because you think you're going to use language, but then what happens, you start feeling it in your chest. And we're trying to meet each other in an emotional discourse. And we're trying to rely on factors that don't bring people together. You'll hear the term therapeutic alliance oftentimes with people with psychiatric disorders, or therapeutic alliance in any real medical model. A therapeutic alliance is not a mind-to-mind integration based on language. The science calls it a right brain to right brain connection based on the emotional circuitry of the brain-body complex, to bring people into a safe place to experience the things that they've been able to experience. Because oftentimes when you start really going back and forth about what you hear about mental illness, when you hear about deep psychiatric psychosis, when you hear about what people have experienced, it has nothing to do with their firsthand experience. And there becomes a bridge back and forth that we can't cross. And the way to cross that is to sit there and use and understand that the feeling of psychosis, especially now that you see the work that I have up on the slide up there by Dr. Musser up at Dartmouth, showing that just the experience of psychosis, just the feel of it, when somebody on self-report later is going through an assessment, reaches the criteria of post-traumatic stress disorder. And anybody in this room would understand that. When you see somebody experience psychosis, you see the terror. At first you see the elation, and when they can't connect, and the floors start falling out beneath them, you see the horrors. And you live with those memories. I have those memories, both as a child watching and as the experiencer. Uniquely, and the next slide will be as we start the narrative, Gerald Edelman won the Nobel Prize. He's the one that created the conceptions of neuroplasticity you hear, as well as neurodarwinism. And what I like about neuroscience is neuroscience talks about mental illness as diseases of consciousness. Full consciousness, feel, taste, touch, not just thought. And if you go through his book, Wider Than the Sky, you'll see at the very end, as he's making an argument for the physical processes that create consciousness, he's saying that the brain is evolving not for more cortex, not for more knowledge, but for deep emotional connection. We have a global cortex now. We have the internet. You can find out anything like that. What's the average weight of an African elephant born 2 months early? You know it in 13 seconds. But what we're losing is this ability to rate back and forth. We're losing the ability to connect. And tonight we will connect through my suffering and my humiliation. We will exalt together to learn about a path to redemption and resurrection. But we have to start somewhere. That's my father. His name is Einar Gasper Arauz. Or more precisely, his name was Einar Gasper Arauz. Einar was a first-generation immigrant from Panama. Him and his mother migrated to Manhattan. He put himself into the Army and enlisted so he could come out and put himself through school. He was diligent, he was handsome, he was robust. These are all descriptions I know from my mother. I don't know my father in any way like that. What happened to my father happens to many people, is as he started to experience his illness, he started to lose the social connections, the ones that NAMI's talking about, the ones that the community leaders here try to put in place as the family can no longer sustain the family member with the active mental illness. What came with my father's illness was tremendous paranoia. And that paranoia lent itself to a reactivity, which lent itself to extreme child abuse at his hands by me. My father would come in and I could start to see that he just didn't interact the way people normally do. He started losing that pace. Now I understand it much more, and once you've seen somebody have an episode, once they're in their second and third episode, you can tell even before they say a word, by their energy, by their physiology, by how they move. I would listen to the furious arguments he would have for my mother as he was trying to connect with her, trying to have her understand what he was feeling. Because when you have these disorders, when you suffer extreme mania and high-level psychosis, it's coming from the inside. It's not a thought process. The thought process narrates the massive feel. And as a child, I started to watch these things, and you knew you weren't safe in the house. And you'll hear lots and lots about attachment, about secure attachment, insecure attachment, disorganized attachment. And a child needs the parent to be that regulating force of security. The child needs consistency and certainty and a malleability of resolution that allows them to know that they can gently step out in the world and experience unsafe things and come back in. Open that window of tolerance, come back. Dosing. My father was an explosion of uncertainty and danger in the house. My father started to lose track of who he was. I became terrified of my father. I started to visit my father on Father's Days in maximum security state hospitals. You don't know what's happening as a child, and as I go back, I don't want to put too much of an adult perspective on what I was experiencing. What I just knew is everything was changing. And it's very unique to think about families, because families need security. And that's why I never quite understood why mental illness had this diagnosis just for the person, because I watch it eviscerate families. The family had an idea which way it was going. They had dreams. They were saving money. Nobody understands what active mental illness is like until you're in it, until you're searching for your loved one, until you are as afraid of your loved one as you are in love with your loved one. When you are forced to make decisions based on your survival that may lead to the death of a loved one. And my father had reached that point. My father had taken murderous acts against me. I walked out of a Catholic school in 1982, and my parents had been divorced. And we were in that type of world where there were restraining orders, but if you've ever had them, restraining orders aren't enforced until they're broken. And I would walk out of class and I would see my father, and he'd be in a car, and I would go to him no matter what you're told at 12, everything inside you is telling you to get to your parent, to try to fix what you just saw, to go back to that place of certainty and safety. And this one time when I walked back to my father, and I got close in the rain, and I saw the car, and I positioned myself in front of the car, and I could see the windshield wipers going back and forth, and I saw that my father's face had no affect. It showed no emotion. And as I got closer, I felt something was wrong, but I just kept going, and no matter what my mother had said, and the police had said, and the therapist had said, and I had to keep going. He's my father. And I remember stepping on my left foot and looking up at the car in the rain, and the car coming straight at me. And I dove left, and the car went right. And because there was a parking lot leaving school, the maximum speed limit's maybe 8-10 miles an hour, I caught the car. I couldn't process what happened. And I ran up next to the car, and I grabbed the real heavy door handle, and it was thick, and it was metal, and it was wet, and it was cold. And I just felt if I could get in the car, if I could just connect to my father, if I could just be safe. And he never looked at me. The car accelerated out of my fingertips. And we had years of my father threatening us and stalking us, and it was unique because I have two sisters. And you could tell that the real driver behind his actions were to connect. I would walk in my apartment, because we had gone from a 6-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom apartment, and I slept on a couch for about 7 years, and everything fell on my mother. And I remember coming home and my father in the house, in his boxer shorts on the couch. And as I tell you that, there's a feeling throughout my chest. My arms get numb. I want to shut down. If you know anything about the autonomic nervous system, I suffer something called dissociation. It's very common in sex abuse victims, very common in child abuse victims. Primarily, if you can't stop what's going to happen to you, your body very kindly has an evolutionary adaptation of the dorsal vagal system that goes under your diaphragm and will actually release endogenous opioids so you don't suffer as much as you die. And I am oversensitized that direction. So when I remember these things, I move with the idea that as I stay mobile, I will move through that phase because I have my own sense of certainty and efficacy in that I'm the storyteller. And I get to reintegrate this. The last time I saw my father was in 1984. I was graduating that Catholic school. Earlier in the morning, he had broken into the Catholic school and tried to kidnap me and my sister. And at this point now, his hair had gone wild, the look that somebody gets of being homeless for a very long time. And I'm going to show you a slide in a second about the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. It's the ACEs study. It's about the different things that children go through and a test of 10 questions to sit there and see where this toxic stress would have started. Ironically, it started in a weight loss program. And what they saw is people of these excessive, morbid size weights had tremendous dysregulation early in life. And in my case, my father, when he was the most active, I was 265 pounds in 6th grade, 7th grade. Without knowing that there is a wiring down under my stomach, I ate for certainty. Because when even the milieu of self is uncertain, then life is a misery. And at this point, when I'd seen my father, I'd lost 100 pounds. And early in the morning, I walked right into him and didn't know who I was. So later in that evening at the graduation, it was a nice graduation, and my mother, who is phenomenal. We're close enough to know about, we've heard of Brooklyn. So my mom is Irish Catholic from Brooklyn. So it's like crossing a very pretty bull shark and a pit bull and making it a parent. And my mother fought for our lives. She fought for our lives. And that evening, as my mom started putting our family back together, we were going to the graduation. Because you know, when families are in chaos, you're looking for those anchors of normalcy. Just something that makes you realize that we're still on planet Earth. That the humiliation of our past narrative, this destruction of it, that we can find something. And my mother got my sisters together and myself, and we went and they put us on a church altar, the graduating students. And I sat there, and I was still young enough where there could be at least an optimism that maybe life could turn around. That even with all this, that there was a chance. Because the hard thing when a family member is the intruder is with all the fear and the anger is a deep love, a hope. And as I stood on the church altar, I watched my mother come to a center aisle just like this in a church and start coming up. And I'm on this side and she's coming. And this is the early 80s. There aren't a lot of divorced mothers walking up. And she had her shoulders back and she was proud. And my mother should have been proud then and should be proud the rest of her life for how she handled herself. And as she came up to me, I saw her, and over to my left, I saw a figure coming. And he stuck out because he was by himself, and all the parents were in the middle, and this lone figure came down along the dark shadows of the left side of the church and emerged into the light, and it was my father. And I was standing there, and I was paralyzed. And as my mother came, she saw him. And she came up, and the parents were supposed to stand cat-a-corner. But I think one of the most awful things of families that are blowing up from the inside out is that we blow up in public, that we blow up in front of people, and no one cares. No one was helping. And my father came around in all black and put himself right here, and my mother sat here, and trying to keep the moment in a certain way and trying to keep me safe. She was growling at him. It was the first time she'd been face to face with him in years. She hadn't even seen him since the morning when he tried to kidnap us. What I remember the most sitting on that railing was I was certain that my father was going to kill me. And as I breathed in and breathed out, I was sure this would be the last few seconds of this life. And I knew no one would help. No one had ever helped. And standing on an altar with the depiction of ultimate suffering behind me, begging to a God that never came, looking at a father that was here to destroy me, I remember wanting to die. Thinking about that it would be well received if my father drove a knife into my stomach. And I think the saddest part about that moment is I was sure I wouldn't reach out or cry to anyone. For I was truly unloved. And I was abandoned. But he didn't kill me. His face was soft. He opened himself to me. He connected to me. He teared up. We spent a few more seconds together, and he turned around, and I never saw my father again. So as I move into my own story, and you see this study up on the slides about the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, my first experience with physiological, psychological dysregulation starts with my child abuse history. It starts with what happens when a system is that uncertain and fearful, and how it develops that way. So I did what a lot of people do that have that history. I ended up enlisting in the US military. I had a wonderful new stepfather named Bud. He was a Marine. I went down to join the Marines after, as they say in New Jersey, I was awarded a driving while intoxicated ticket. Bud being a 1950s Marine, I came back, I said, Bud, I'm going to join the Marines. He goes, I'm going to give you a little advice. You are not the kind of person that should go to Marine Corps boot camp. You don't like to be told what to do, you're sarcastic, and you're sloppy. He goes, I would shoot you. Bud didn't necessarily mince words. But he walked me into the Navy recruiter. And if you're lucky enough to find a hand in hell, it was the perfect fit for me. And I served 4 years. I was supposed to do 6 active. I was discharged as an honorable discharge under medical conditions due to extensive foot surgeries after Desert Storm. And as I was waiting to get out, I met a woman who was very, very nice, and she was pregnant and was going to have the child and raise it alone. And I was very drawn to that sense of self, this belief in herself that she would do this. And we became very close friends, and being that my hero was my stepfather, I figured I could step in. And I married her. And on March 8th, 1994, she gave birth. And what I remember the most about that was how honored I was to be a father. See, I had stopped connecting to the world. I couldn't be intimate with anyone after what happened with my father. I couldn't be vulnerable. But as babies are, she was pure and perfect, and she was beautiful. And I loved being her father for a year. But in 1995, while I was living in Memphis, Tennessee, while watching a TV show and getting a computer science degree, after discharge, I was watching Charlie Rose, and he was speaking to somebody, and I had this feeling of, are they talking to me? And you have this over connection to things. They call it in psychiatry ideas of reference, where everything is somehow connected to you. They're talking to you. The message is, it's for me. And the best way I can put it, Kay Jamison called it delicious hypomania, the author of An Unquiet Mind. This feeling of what it feels like to go through your skin of being special. And as I watched and the elation grew and sleep became harder, I would lie down, but the states didn't match up. I was never tired. I started to use drugs, primarily marijuana, to somewhat offset this new burgeoning lightning that was like having a sunrise in your chest every second, and my speech started getting faster. And I started to have this movement of ideas, but each idea seemed better than the next. Life had this maximum optimism that every breath held a miracle. But families are in reality. And my ex-wife, who was then my wife, knows that something's wrong. And she's afraid. And my family gets involved. And my biological father had only died the year before, and my mother's now getting these reports back in New Jersey that her son is following the exact path. 30 years quicker than my father. And as me and my ex-wife started to fight, because she couldn't align with my grandiosity, I needed her to buy in. Like, I wasn't just going to be successful, I was going to be the intercontinental czar of awesomeness. I mean, there's not words for what mania feels like. It's like mainlining hot fudge. I mean, everything is great. And as you're going back and forth, it starts to become angry in the misalignment. You can't figure it out. People are telling you, like, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? But you're driven to do something, and we reached a consensus we would get divorced. And we spent 3 days together after that. And each day I knew I would eventually be saying goodbye to my daughter. And mixed in with that mania was this heart-breaking violence of loss that I knew was coming. And on the third day, when my car was packed, with my ex-wife being the absolute highest standard of class and care and letting me do these things, not understanding what's happening, but needing to make the right decisions for her and her daughter. And I'll tell you the hardest thing about those things was knowing I was no longer part of the family. Feeling it. And I walked into her room, and I saw her laying there, and she was on her stomach. And I picked her up the way that you pick up a 1-year-old, where they stay half asleep in your hands because they trust you. And I held her to me. And I hope there's many things you get to experience in your life, but I hope you never have to kiss something goodbye that you know you love more than yourself, that you know you'll never see again. And I picked her up and I pressed my lips to her cheek and I kissed her. And I walked out of her life. And I've never seen her again. And my mania hit a level I didn't know existed. And I drove down to Dallas, Texas from Memphis, and I stayed awake for 13 days. My best friend Robbie, who I'm still best friends with now, watching, uncertain what's happening. I went down to Deep Ellum, which used to be a funky part of Dallas, and I got a tattoo on my chest. The memories of my mania are sewn into my skin. I am very lucky I like that tattoo. I mean, you want to talk about it could have been anything. And 13 days later, I woke up in a maximum security psychiatric hospital in New Jersey. And they said, Mr. Arauz, you are bipolar, you're alcoholic. These are the things you can't do, these are the things you can do. And I don't know why to this day I still remember somebody telling me I couldn't be a senator. And I remember how angry that made me. And I'm sitting there, when I was in the first hospital, I woke up in restraints. I'm somebody they have to hit with that very heavy sedative mix, where I literally will be in a hospital setting and transported and wake up in a hospital, and I have no idea where I am or what happened. And my own journey started there, and like most people, I couldn't accept that journey. I couldn't accept the diagnosis. The misery of wanting to go back to that life. The humiliation of what I had thought I'd created and not finding a way back into it. So I did what a lot of people do. I tried to use outside things to make me feel better. One was school, and I'd gotten into NYU, and I was going to go there. The other was drugs again, this time cocaine. When you combine it with mania, it's like an atom bomb. And this time I didn't wake up in a maximum security hospital that was private. I woke up in a VA administrative hospital on an award where they keep people for 7 to 10 days because of how extensive the symptoms are. And I stayed there for months. They couldn't break my symptoms. I wore a rosary and I hopped bed to bed, thinking that I was Elijah the prophet. The mania moved through me in an all-encompassing way where I no longer even thought about my family. I lived in the totality of the sickness and the illness. There's no me when that happens. Eckhart Tolle, the great spiritualist, will talk about the silent watcher. The person that sits back and sees life happen, and if you can get that space, that your life can be better. In psychology, you may hear it called metacognition. What's very unique about my form of mania is the silent watcher is as manic as the body. There's no place in there where you can reach me. I am programmed absolutely. And as my family would come up and beg me to do these things, I would threaten to kill them. They would take me off a locked ward and have guards like that into the room and then sit with guards as I talked to my grandmother and my mother. I'd become my father. And as that started to go on, they started to restrain me more and more. And what I remember the most was that life was only about that moment. There was no longer a narrative that correlated with it. There was just pure expression and reaction. People would find me underneath beds smoking cigarettes. I would get so exhausted I would lay in corners. I was never allowed outside. And as the restraints started getting longer, the suffering started getting worse until I was in restraints for 24 hours. And what you should understand about restraints is restraints are physically, they are pure misery. If we know anything about psychiatric drugs, almost all of them cause some type of dehydration. By the time you've been in a hospital for months, you haven't been outside. You're not breathing fresh air. You're put into a bed with your arms out like that and your feet widened and restrained, and you're not given a pillow, and you start losing the ability to breathe. Your tongue is thick. Each swallow feels like you're choking. After 5 hours, your whole body cramps. After 10 hours, you go to the bathroom in the bed. At 18 to 20 hours, you start reaching a place that's no longer human. Suffering visceral fear and misery, you are held in a place where nobody is showing you mercy. And there are no clinical parameters out there that talk about 1 hour versus 2 hours versus 3 hours. I understand the threats of inpatient psychiatric hospitals and ERs. But until the people using restraints understand that they will abruptly curtail the pleasure and freedom of that patient's life for the rest of their lives, I don't think that the restraint should be used. People might be put in restraints for 5 minutes. 5 minutes isn't 5 hours. Gloria Huntley was put in restraints for days, screaming, and died. And at 18 hours, when I was in the restraints, all I could think about, all that just kept coming into my head were thoughts of my father and my daughter. My father and my daughter, my father and my daughter. And all of a sudden, I got that familiar feeling that I had on the altar with my father. And this call was coming out of me that I just wanted to release, and I just sat there, and all of a sudden, for the first time ever, I finally said what I always wanted to say, and I just begged to die. The last words I had, I just screamed and yelled for someone to kill me. And a nurse walked in. I don't know if she's a psychiatric nurse. I know she was a nurse. I don't know she was a nurse. I know she was real. And she came in with a cold rag, and she scooped up and she held my head, she picked it up, and she wiped along my face. And if she hadn't done that, I'm certain I would have had a heart attack from the anticipatory stress. I'm certain of it. I had stopped being able to breathe, I was screaming, I was just gonna pass out, and she sat there and she showed me connection. And I'll tell you, the one thing I can give you, as somebody who's lost everything and was allowed to pass back, is that it's all about intimate connection with another person. When you're standing there in the gallows and that door is about to open, all you think about are the loves of your life. And as a nurse wiped my face, I could remember my mother doing that for me because I had terrible asthma growing up, which again is also a stress response due to my adverse childhood experiences. And I could picture my mother holding me. And I went back to my memories of the church. You see, mental illness took my father and it took my faith. It took everything. But the last thing I remember saying and thinking after the nurse walked out, and I was closing my eyes to really slip under the ice of my life, like I was now going to be gone. And I said, "Mary, Mother of God, help me." And I pictured my mother and the life I'd led. And I said goodbye to her and closed my eyes in those restraints, thinking I would never wake up again. But I did. But I did wake up. And what's very unique is I was on a grant for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration with the American Psych Nurse Association about recovery and psychiatric illness. And uniquely, they wanted to examine recovery in the inpatient unit. And my recovery started on an inpatient unit. My recovery started in hell with the different veterans who found me and connected with me, who didn't give up on me. We had nothing to offer each other, nothing. But they gave me their attention. They gave me an honest emotional response back and forth. when you are absolutely alone, the answer is connection. When your life is totally humiliated, the answer is not pride, it's integration. So the question is, having this as my full diagnosis, would I end up like my father, and how do you make your way back from there? How does somebody end up in front of you to sit there and transform into holding the medical school appointment, writing the books, and more importantly, living the life I wanted? This is a painting by Jose Clemente Orozco. It's called Man of Fire, and I think it's very important, especially if you're thinking about families putting themselves together, healthcare clinicians working with people. The idea is positive change or negative change is hard. It's hard. I've spoken to thousands of doctors, and I say when someone is standing in front of you and we're putting together an actual plan that changed their whole life, when was the last time that you've changed anything? Anything for longer than a few weeks. In a world where you're inundated with emails, 10 steps to this, what character would you be in Friends, what's your birthday mean by color? You're just distracted and nothing changes and nothing changes and nothing changes. And now, everything must change. Everything. How is that done? What does that feel like? That's why I love this quote, that man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculptor. You see, my favorite artist is Rodin. I was just down at his museum in Philadelphia, and I love the idea that you chisel in to the perfection, that you are born perfect. But the scar tissue is brutal. And who's going to show you that path? I follow my GPS everywhere. I'm like a GPS commando. I don't know what state I'm laying in. If I have an address, I'll get a rental car and I'll be there. I could drive by the whole landscape burning in a 30-foot purple cow. I wouldn't see it. I'll just go where I'm going. But that's because I know the destination. And that somebody can give me known paths to get there. So that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about bringing somebody all the way back. And you look at this slide about how to recover a life, you're going to see the term Virgil, and I talk about it in my book. It's from Dante's Inferno, when Dante's going through the hell of self, when he's walking through his humiliations to find himself, when he's needing to share it, he's walking with the poet Virgil. Virgil is from hell. He knows the landscape of the underworld. You must find your Virgils. You will get lost in the journey. People need to be able to speak that language of degradation so you meet them, to then allow you to believe that you would even try to change something. And then, because we're not going through all these things, I grew up in my faith, which the idea had about contrition. And although that faith was taken from me, I ended up in a 12-step program where one of the steps was amends. Going back to people and saying, this is what I've done. You tell me what else I've done. And you tell me how to fix it. And I'll tell you, I felt better about doing that with people that I had injured drunk or injured sober. I felt very resentful about going back and doing it with people I'd injured while mentally ill, while psychotic. But it was until I tethered those two things, where I could sit in front of my mother and take full responsibility for what I did, to watch the pain and horror in her face, to have Virgils around me that would let me know I could stay in there. Virgils allow you to have a higher sensitization to dysregulation so you can change, so the window gets bigger. But you need to believe someone did it. And when you're looking at people and you're hearing them and you're believing them. And I wondered if I could do it. And When I think about the different Virgils that I found, initially I found them with people, that's Virgil and Dante going through the ninth circle of hell. And what's unique about the ninth circle of hell is that the ninth circle of hell, conversely to the first 8 that are all fire, the ninth one is ice. And going back to the idea of a humiliated life, of the stigma, it's the idea that the worst possible place you can be in is when you're frozen from the world. The only thing sadder than being by yourself when you feel like you can't connect is being in a group of people and thinking you can't connect. And feeling like there's no way back to yourself. And I found people and I took actions to get out of that ice, but I had to first go backwards and negate the wreckage of my life, the relationships. And 2 of them would have to be fixed first. I would have to sit there and figure out how I could fix the relationship with my stepdaughter. And 10 years down the line, I was able to make amends and take full responsibility for all that I had done. I had done it the first year, but it wasn't that full, and I had done it later. But 16 years into my recovery, while in a state in the Midwest, I'd gone back and forth with my ex-wife on Facebook, because as part of the amends was that we would stay friends. And she told me that my stepdaughter had actually read the book, and that she forgave me. She didn't quite understand what happened. But I'll tell you, when you have those moments when you can fix the most humiliating and shameful parts of your life, there's a visceral integration, a wholeness that comes. All recovery starts with the acute symptoms. Then you go into the foundational symptoms, where the structures have changed their function to create those symptoms. And the structure of mine was disconnection. And that I would have left something I loved that much. But the next phase and what I had to do was sit there and figure out how I could fix the relationship with my father. That painting is Rembrandt's Prodigal Son. And I spent so many years hating my father. Hospital after hospital I was in, all that my family had lost, seeing the wreckage that we had been through. You see, mental illness, when you're going back and forth in a clinical discussion, is very linear. Symptoms, protocols, assessments. Mental illness lived is circular, convergent, painful. Your recovery is not based only on symptom abatement. It's based on recovering a life. And I knew I would have to rectify this with my biological father, and I didn't know how to do it, and I didn't know a way to even ask to do it, and I didn't know why I should do it. But I was told by my Virgils, there were people around me that I'd seen suffer like that. Then they said, you must, and I went back to the hospital where I was restrained, Building 53. And I sat under the window I was restrained in. And I talked to my father. And I asked him if he hated me. And I asked him if he would have wanted to actually kill me when he tried to run me over. And slowly, integrating into that moment, knowing him more, I asked my father for his forgiveness for hating him for so long, for not being able to save him, for knowing that he died loving his kids. And the humiliation and shame stopped him from ever coming back and seeing us, being only an hour away. And I forgave my dad. And I forgave myself. And I forgave God. Because what I found out as I journeyed more into my father was that while my ACE score is 9, my father's ACE score is 10. My father never really had a chance. His life was taken from him early, and he did the best he could. And now I'm proud to be his son. I'm proud to share the name. We've had a box of pictures in our house for 20 years, and we don't have a history, our family. We're rootless. There's no pictures. We don't talk about the good old days because there were none. And I found a picture of my father holding me. And I know he loved me. And that doesn't make it easier as you age, it makes it worse. But it didn't work out for us. So I said to myself, as I started to integrate my own experience around the ACE test, the bipolar disorder, the alcoholism, the drug addiction, the numerous suicide attempts, the childhood obesity, the post-traumatic stress disorder, I was able to start to find myself in this disorganized viscera, this system that was never safe. Able to create a narrative that I could live with. And as my life started coming together and I organized it, I started to wonder what my dreams were. What could I have? Then April 9th, 2009, with a man who's not allowed to believe in miracles, I had a daughter. Her name is Olivia Nadine. Olivia because it means to live. And Nadine because it's my mom's first name. You see, I sat there and thought I was abandoned my whole life. But I had the greatest force in the world fighting for me. An Irish Catholic mom from Brooklyn. And I started to wonder to myself, what part of my story could I change through action? How would I end up here? Could I change not just my cognitive perspective on the world, but through extensive trauma work and reorganizing my physiology, could I change my visceral reaction to the world? Could I understand that as my mind is a liar, so is my body? And my journey started. And I went back to school and did numerous things. And in 2006, I left everything I was doing with a graduate degree and took an $800 a month job as a consumer going into state psychiatric hospitals to build it to where I am today. From lecturing in closed wards to people about smoking, to holding medical grand rounds at Dartmouth. You see, I didn't just want to resurrect, I wanted to redeem. I wanted to live. And I think about this quote from Lawrence of Arabia, where it says, all men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake up in the day to find out it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dream with open eyes to make it possible. This I did, he said. My life is predicated on a dream that I wouldn't even share with others because nobody said it could happen. I lived a decade afraid of what my diagnosis meant. And I held in my heart of hearts that I could do things. And I sat there and I said, I would like to get advanced degrees. I would like to earn a medical school appointment. I would like to write an award-winning book. I would like to lecture and speak around the world. I would like to be able to let my mom retire and own her home and reintegrate my family. I would like to be a father. And I would like to be a father to others that were abused and broken from the world. And standing here in front of you, this I did. This I did. So if I offer you anything as we close, be dangerous to yourself tonight. Whatever narrative you've been telling yourself viscerally, spiritually, cognitively, what cannot happen, with eyes open, challenge it. Find within yourself the strength to become vulnerable to another person. And with eyes open, decide right now the things that you would like to see come to fruition that you believe cannot. If I offer you anything, I very simply offer you the impossible made possible. A Virgil. Because I was a futureless man. My psychological narrative told me I would never do anything. My visceral narrative told me every second that the world was to hurt me. A futureless man lives in his nightmares, physically and spiritually. But today, I'm a man with a future. I can see forward. And because of what we've done here tonight, I'm lucky enough to say, I'm living my dream. Thank you very much for your time and for your willingness to stand with me as I offered you my humiliation and my integration, for us to find out that the strongest thing in life is communion and the ability to know that you can change your life story, that the narrative isn't set, that you're allowed to be dangerous to yourself. Thank you very much for this evening.
Eric, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We really appreciate the honesty in your message and the power behind your words. It was extremely powerful, at least for me listening, and I appreciate your being with us. I'd like to open it up for questions. I don't know if people would like to make comments or questions. We do have a few minutes. I'll let you think about that for a couple of minutes, while I also just remind you that there are books. Eric's story is, it's a beautiful book. I've read it. It's on the table. It's powerful. It's very, very powerful. And unputdownable is what it says on the cover. And I find that to be very true. So they're there for the taking, and Eric will also be around if you'd like to have him sign your book. So now I'd just like to open it up. I don't know if anyone has questions or comments.
Everyone should know I'm very used to the post sort of atom bomb effect. So
Yeah.
I have zero expectation. Just the idea is there was, as we paced and went back and forth, there was a security here. And we're communicating the whole time, even if I'm just the one speaking. And so allow yourselves to, you don't have to ask anything you don't want to. I'll make sure everyone will have my email address, because oftentimes the questions come up are very personal. Again, it's sometimes easier to not ask something face-to-face, but I will answer any and all questions, whether they are face-to-face or in electronic correspondence, because one must be the thing itself, or life is not necessarily worth living falsely. So anything you need, I'll do.
And I have Eric's contact information, and I'm at rebecca.dolgan@scranton.edu. So please let me know. And I'll just step down here. We might need to do a collective deep breath or
We'll
two.
just breathe in and we'll breathe out. Now we can do something very cool, actually. So I own the Trauma Institute in New Jersey, right? So I work in a lot of neurophysiological dysregulation and cueing techniques to bring you online. So there's something, we all know what the word yoga is, like we know yoga. So I'm a big yoga guy. I like yoga. It's very funny because for my own ego, I want to say I also take martial arts, but no, I do yoga. And I'm human. And so there's this unique thing in pranayama yoga about breathing. And the longer your exhale is, scientifically, your parasympathetic nervous system comes on. It means you're safe. So there's something we can do. It's called the bee breath. And you're going to like it very much. What we do is we inhale together, and then we're going to buzz all at once. And it's really cool because you have a recurrent laryngeal nerve that vibrates and you know you're safe. It's a long exhale. And what happens is we all end up in this sense of visceral ease based on an ancient tradition and modern day science. No one has to do it if they don't want to. But you'll enjoy it. You'll enjoy the breathing, and you'll enjoy the overhearing as your vagus nerve attenuates your inner ear muscle and lets you know. Okay? So, we are in a moment going to take a deep breath in. I do with my eyes closed. You don't have to. I know I'm from New Jersey. I might take your wallets and all those things. I get it. But, so we'll breathe in, and then when we breathe out, when we do the as long as you want, once you're done, I want you to sit there and feel along this pathway the opening, the ease, the inner silence. All right? Here we go. Pretty good, right? Hey, that's a freebie. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll be over here if you need to sign your book. Oh, question?
Eric, you're bipolar. What does your treatment entail for that?
The first 10 years after diagnosis was lithium. Initially, acutely, what breaks my episodes is Haldol. Haldol oftentimes is considered the poison and the antidote in one, because the side effect of it is I can't stop moving. But I start to become cognitively aware. You'll actually see in the book where it's almost like this second sight of like what just happened type of thing. The lithium was the first protocol and the only protocol that worked on me. I was on it for 10 years to the point where I suffered a lot of the side effects, the weight gain, really big boils on my neck. But why I talk about the Virgils is because I was in a spiritual community of other people suffering for their lives, I felt like it was worth it because I heard the language of suffering to redemption. Later, I started to develop kidney issues. So what they had done is they titrated me off of lithium with the idea of creating a space. I've now been medication-free almost 10 years. It wasn't a goal. Primarily now I do all trauma work. I have an extensive yoga practice. I have I work very hard on what's called the visceral fluency. But I was terrified to come off medication. I couldn't believe it. And the cocktails were very hard at first because I've been on, at one point the most drugs I was on was lithium, Haldol, an antidepressant, and maybe Ativan to cut all of it. And it's experiencing the side effects on a polypharmacological regime are kind of brutal. But because I was around other people talking about rebuilding my life, like not just getting a job, not just living without symptoms, but literally going back through my life in what would almost be like an ancient type of quest, it reached deeper levels of my consciousness where I was willing to suffer to get there. And as of today, I haven't had a symptom since 2000. That was my last hospitalization. I haven't had a drink or a drug since '96. That was a very large part of my treatment, was getting sober. And I just did everything I could. and that's where I am today. I always tell people I don't recommend anybody coming off medication because I work with psychiatrists, and even coming off can harm you, but people say they hear my story, I'll say, okay, if you do what I did for 10 years, we'll talk about it. But most people don't know how to buy back into their lives, and then the medication becomes not just what they focus on, it can become a very big barrier between person and family. Because the family sees it as a salvation, and it is in certain ways, and the person sees it as a constant reminder that they're sick and something's wrong. Thank you. Right after him, ma'am.
I'm a patient advocate at a state hospital, and I was wondering if there was a clinician that touched you most, or was it another consumer that had a shared experience?
It's a great question. So, now remember, I'm giving you the book, so I'm not trying to sell it, but in the book, I talk about when I was in the VA hospital, there were 3 veterans that walked with me and stayed with me. And they didn't have necessarily great cognitive interventions with me. They just allowed me to not feel alone. So those were the first 3 patients. Clinician-wise, there was someone named Ann Cosgrove who was a social worker. I didn't have insurance, so I was in the system. And you know, where you sit for an hour to get a meeting and you go in, and Ann was about 2.5 feet tall. She just seemed very small. And yet her whole office was like wallpapered in horses. And she would talk with me about life. And she gave me time. And it's so unique for what I know now about neurophysiological cueing, sensitization, paralleling, where I could set all that up for a clinician, but she did it naturally. She stayed with me in the pain. And it was painful. And there is a doctor named Dr. Jill Williams, who's the head of addiction psychiatry at Rutgers, who when I later took that consumer job, so I have a master's in industrial relations from Rutgers University, and I had actually gotten an international management job at the biggest shipping company in the world, and went home to my wife. I'm married to someone named Cheryl Joy Arauz, who's awesome. We're married 16 years. It'll be 16 years, and I've never met anybody like her at all. I guess the saddest thing I could say is I go into a lot of state hospitals, and I was up in Syracuse, and the CEO's like, what's the thing that you think would help the most? And I said, I was unconditionally loved. You know, I walked into a 12-step meeting, and I walked out, and then I met my wife almost right after. Our first date was to the VA hospital. And I took her. And you know, VA hospitals, like many state hospitals, they have old hallways underneath, and you have veterans laying there. And I was about to say, can't go back here for anyone, because I should have died there. And my wife started crying. She didn't see them as monsters or psych patients. She saw the suffering. And I used to think that it was for my wife to turn into me. I don't know if you can guess, I have a pretty strong personality. And my wife is like this noble, quiet lion, right? Just runs marathons, just unbelievable person. And I said to her last year, I said, I thought I was supposed to turn you into me. And the reason my life has worked out is because I became you, because if you look at the child abuse part, which attachment's very important. It's very important to understand within psychiatric patients that they've lost all attachment. And oftentimes the clinician will be the only tenuous attachment they have. She grew up in a very happy home, very happy. And there's a unique difference in our levels of dysregulation or sensitization to that. But lastly, Jill Williams. When I went and I walked in, I said, I'd like to take this job at Choices to go in $800 a month, that's it. Imagine telling your wife that's what you're about to go do. And she never treated me differently from that first day to a year later when I left, to when she put me up for the medical school appointment, because you have to get put up, you have to go through. I've now been appointed for over 6 years. To where I sat in front of her when I wrote the book. I had a big book deal, and I had to get out of it. They wanted creative control. So I needed help getting it out, because I raised all this money and self-published it, not important. And I sat in front of her, and I started asking her for help, and I was dressed like this, and I actually started shaking. I didn't know what was going on. My whole body started leaving. And I actually heard myself say to her, I can't ask anyone for help. And she helped me. And we're still friends. So there's no pearls. The pearls are in the time. The pearls are in the attention and the emotion. I'm on the steering committee of the largest psychiatric event in the country. I do 8 medical education regionals. There's nothing new. We're finding out the brain-body complex and these type of connections and inflammation and all the things that you think, these heart-to-heart connections. Those are the things that are going to be really the game changer. And at the same time, there's hard science showing that that affects neuroscience, it affects physiological states and all those things, which may drive a lot of the other things. She had her hand up right here, so. I was trying to be
I
fair.
had a very similar question, but I do have a curious question, if you wouldn't mind.
I'll answer anything, sure. I'm here.
The picture. I said I had a similar question, but now I have a curious question. The picture of the person in restraint, was that you?
No.
Okay.
That was a Google image. Right. Right, but because of the haircut, right? All of a sudden you figure, yeah. It's funny because I also used to show a picture of the thing that worked the most for me was I had pet therapy in the hospital. They wouldn't let me near human beings after the restraints. So there was a dog. You'll read about the dog. And so I found a picture of a guy hugging a dog. So someone said, are those pictures you? And I realized that we have become very accustomed to the idea of people having cameras follow them. So, but no, they're just very effective because of the agreement. Right. And it doesn't, because of what I know about what's called the social engagement system in your face, he doesn't have the look of being tortured where I try very much not to dysregulate the audience. I try to move you left brain to right brain, and I try to vertically bring you up and down in a very safe way. I figured that's about as safe as a picture I could get of that. But thank you. Ma'am?
My question is more of a, I don't know, maybe a conundrum that I have. I work in a partial hospitalization program.
Could you speak a tiny bit louder for me?
Yeah,
Oh, thank you.
my question is more of a conundrum, and I don't know that there's necessarily an answer to it. I work in a partial hospitalization program in an organization that I had 3 position changes in less than 2 years. So I would make connections with my clients, make that visceral, real attachment, and then because of the way the system works, a program would close down, funding would change, something would happen, and I would be removed as a therapist, thrown into another position. And I find it heartbreaking because sometimes I will check and hear how is so-and-so doing? Oh, they didn't do very well, they went backwards, or oh, so-and-so is not doing well now. And I don't know that there's an answer to this, but I wish there was a way to change that, because you're talking about making those connections. And we want to make that therapeutic connection. We want to be real. We ask our clients to trust us and meet us where we are, and we try to meet them where they are. And then because we work within a system that's broken, it's one more person ripped out of their life that they can't count on because they're gone. Any answers or any ideas about how?
Imagine if I thought for like 10 seconds and just fixed the whole thing. But what's unique about what you're asking is it's twofold. One, it's what Rebecca and I talked about coming over here, and the idea is that the systems that need the most help are the largest systems, yet they're the hardest to change. And also that there are large meta-analysis of therapeutic workers having epidemic levels of secondary PTSD because of either the therapeutic alliance having on their side losing the attachment. You know, the idea that dyadically, you know, we regulate interpersonally. It's both people going back on. There's a study in molecular psychiatry showing that you even have a reciprocal neural interaction whether you want to show it or not. So what you're seeing now is they're trying to talk a bit about trauma-informed systems. And what trauma-informed systems, once they can conceptualize a little bit more sophisticated, they're not that good at it yet, it's the idea of understanding it's a physiological connection. Trauma is a physiological dysregulation, and then you can go back and forth to cue each other. You are doing the thing that you can do, and you'll have the outcomes you're going to have specifically because you're aware of how you're trying to therapeutically align and what that actually means, bringing that in line. Until the system actually tries to go trauma-informed, because it's not recovery-based. Recovery-based is more checklist, and that's all good. You know, do people believe in recovery? But what you're specifically talking about is understanding the physiological displacement and how you can use certain tools within yourself to physiologically cue another that they're safe. So large systems are I'm trying to do it in the state of New Jersey with the Department of Children and Families, 6,000 workers. And sometimes the basic conceptualization is understanding that safety and danger are the states that create that dysregulation, and the way to bring that in is certainty and efficacy. And sometimes that's the best you can do. So what we can do is we can talk after, and I can give you information that you can try to do, but you're going to see at the systems level, it is trying to make the largest change with the most fundamental one move, exactly like we talked about. But that's the only way I see that specific question being answered. And you're seeing it in smaller systems where that can afford the sanctuary model, where they're doing all this. But the larger systems where the turnover is greatest, where now you've added uncertainty when you're asking someone to be vulnerable, is now causing even greater negative outcomes. So there are some things which I'll just send you a bunch of stuff and hopefully it can help you. I wish I had a better answer. Mm-hmm. I have no more buzzing tricks.
Looks like we might have come to a close, and I'd like to just give us an opportunity to thank Eric one more time for his presentation. Thank you all for coming. Don't forget, you can take a book. There's many more behind the table. I'll pull a few more out. And if you'd like to talk with Eric, he'll be over here at the tables. Thanks so much.